and welcome to the COVID-19 Public Health Action webinar, Leveraging Institutional Purchasing Power to Drive Food Systems Change in Hawaii. My name is Steph Moyer, and I'm the Community Initiatives and Training Coordinator for the Hawaii Public Health Institute. Before we get started, I just want to go over some Zoom housekeeping. For all questions, please utilize the chat box or questions and answers box located at the bottom of your screen. We are not offering any continuing education credits for our COVID webinar series. And lastly, all webinars are being recorded and will be available on the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui's YouTube channel. Without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Susan Mercado, our guest moderator for today.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Susan Mercado. I'm the Director for Food Systems and Resiliency of the Hawaii Public Health Institute, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. We've got a very interesting topic. We're going to talk about leveraging institutional purchasing power to drive food system change in Hawaii. And I think just a little reflection before we start, this pandemic has shown us that what happens in one part of our life affects multiple systems. And when we talk about food security and we think about how we're providing food for people who need it, whatever we do impacts on health, on the environment, and on economic systems that also impact on the lives of individuals. So we are going to have a very interesting group of panelists who are going to talk about purchasing power and how that impacts on food systems. And let me introduce each one of them. We have Sarah Allen, who is the administrator of the Hawaii State Procurement Office and the Chief Procurement Officer for the executive branch since 2013 and was reappointed by Governor Ige in December 2017. We also have Dexter Kishida. Dexter's passion is to connect communities to their food. And for the past 8 years, he has worked for the Department of Education's School Food Services branch, most recently as their farm to school coordinator. He now works for the City and County of Honolulu's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability and Resiliency as their Food Security and Sustainability Program Manager. We also have Randall Tanaka, who is the Assistant Superintendent for the Office of Facilities and Operations of the Department of Education. Prior to this appointment, Mr. Tanaka served as Deputy Director of the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism. So they're going to be in the panel. Now, our main speaker is Paula Daniels. Paula is co-founder and chair of the Center for Good Food Purchasing, a social enterprise and nonprofit founded in July of 2015 as a national spin-off from the Los Angeles Food Policy Council, which Paula founded in 2011. The Center for Good Food Purchasing uses the power of procurement to create a transparent, equitable food system that prioritizes the health and well-being of people, animals, and the environment through the nationally networked adoption and implementation of good food purchasing program by large institutions. She is a lawyer and a public policy leader in environmental, food, and water policy. So if you've just joined us, welcome. And to all of you who are watching on the playback on YouTube, welcome to this webinar. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have a presentation by Paula, and then we're going to ask our panelists to respond to that. So without further ado, may I turn you over to Paula Daniels. Paula, go ahead, please.
Aloha kakao. It's such a wonderful experience for me to be speaking to you all. As Stephanie mentioned in the bio, I'm in Los Angeles, so I'm speaking to you all from Los Angeles, and it's not as dark as it looks on my screen. It's just where my room is. It almost looks like sunset, but it's a really hot afternoon out here, about 98 degrees right now. But I'm here. I've been doing a lot of my work here, and they've asked me to talk to you about the work I've been doing in Los Angeles and California and throughout the state, and then set that up for how this might be relevant for Hawaii. And I want to say that this work that I'm about to tell you about comes from the heart of Hawaii. I may be living in Los Angeles. I'm from Hawaii, and Hawaii is always in my heart. The Daniel side of the family, my dad's side, goes way back on Maui. On my mom's side of the family, we've been on Oahu for a long time. It's where I grew up. My sisters are still there. Some of you may know my mother passed away last year. Her name's Jackie Young. She was a politician in Hawaii and did a lot of work there. And my own experience of Hawaii and my family's experience in Hawaii and Hawaii's experience with the food system historically and currently and where we are now, and all the work that people are trying to do to make it a more self-sufficient and a regionally resilient food system has been deep in my heart since growing up. And you know, my dad grew up on the Punane sugar plantation. My grandpa was the maintenance engineer at the Punane mill. So all those experiences of Hawaii have always shaped a lot of my work here in California. So what I'm going to tell you about is the work of the Center for Good Food Purchasing. So I'm going to share my screen. It'll take a second. I was trying to get it teed up so it wouldn't have to be, so you wouldn't have to watch me like click through it all, but it's just, I have an old computer, so that's the way it worked. So if you'll bear with me. So here my mouse is moving slowly. It might be feeling too hot because it's really hot here. What I'm going to do is tell you about the center, how it came about, and the work that it does, and explain how the program that we have developed was meant to be a transformative tool for the food system, so that it could be used to help create a regionally resilient and healthy food system that supports the local food economy. So I will tell you first about the Center for Good Food Purchasing. This is our logo here, and the theory of change in part that we speak to. This is a quote on the right side from Olivier de Schutter, who was the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food. And he was in that position at the time that we were putting all of our work together and learned about it. He agreed with our theory of change, which was shared by a number of folks, that this is an important tool for changing food systems. Governments, he said, have few sources of leverage over globalized food systems, but public procurement, that means the purchasing power of public institutions, is one of them. So that means schools, hospitals, etc. And so I'm going to talk to you about how we came to that. What I think is important always in telling the story about a program or anything significant is the origin story. How did we get to this place? So what I want to talk to you about is the Los Angeles Food Policy Council, which I founded. You heard that I was the senior advisor to the mayor of Los Angeles, Mayor Villaraigosa of Los Angeles. I worked on a number of green infrastructure and urban forestry and other types of issues for the mayor, and a lot of environmental issues. And I developed this food policy framework, which he supported wholeheartedly. And I'm starting you off with sort of the end. This is a graphic that was developed in 2013 when we left office. He termed out, that means I left too. But this is a graphic that shows where we ended up with the Food Policy Council. But I do want to tell you the story of its origin as well. But each of these squares in this graphic shows an organization that was attached to our work. The reason I'm talking to you about this is I want to share with you how grounded in community this program was. It came from working with community. It came from a multi-disciplinary, multi-sector stakeholder group, and I'm going to explain that process in a second. But I wanted you to see how it ended up, that all the folks that were part of our organization that were part of developing this program that I'm going to talk to you about. So you can see a lot of folks were involved in Good Food Access. One square means one organization. A lot of folks were involved in the good food economy and urban agriculture, food systems, environmental sustainability, and so forth. So how did we get there? We started with bringing folks together in 2009, which is when I started this work. I pitched it to the mayor that we should have a food policy framework. 2009, 11 years ago. And Los Angeles was not at the time thinking about food systems in the way that I know Hawaii has been for a long time, because it's got the biggest port in the United States. Food goods are flowing in and out of LA. They weren't really thinking much about local food beyond farmers markets, but we were moving the idea of farmers markets to larger scale was what I talked to him about, and he agreed, and making it so that we started with the definition. What do we want? We want a good food system where food is healthy, affordable, fair, meaning fair labor practices, fair payment of wages all across the food chain, and sustainable, meaning environmentally sustainable, particularly in a time when we're addressing climate change. So we developed, this is very simple look in the way back mirror, but we developed some goals that I wanted to share with you, because you will see how common they are. Again, these are goals from 2009. I look at this and it feels like, I feel nostalgic about it because our goals have become much more complex and the details and objectives within them have been as well. But you can see the commonality between those goals and goals that you'll find in Hawaii and in a lot of other places. The way we went about our work, again, to show you how it was grounded in community, is we started with a task force, and the task force was a multi-sector task force across the food system spectrum, from farmer to consumer advocates. We worked for 10 months and we developed a food policy framework. Out of that came this document that you see here, the Good Food for All agenda. And we had 55 recommendations, 6 priority action areas, and a number of steps. And we recommended that there be a food policy council. I was chair, and I was chairing this and driving this forward as a mayor's appointee to have it be an initiative of Los Angeles. And one of the areas that you'll see here is promote a good food economy. And again, good food was defined in that holistic way that I mentioned to you already. So I want to talk about the structure. Again, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just so you can, again, understand where all this work came from. This is what ultimately we put together. This is the Food Policy Council staff, and we had about 8 staff. I started off with me, and then I hired somebody, and then we hired somebody. And by the time I left in 2013, we had 8 staff. And we had a leadership board of 40. And the members of the leadership board, I think this is just helpful to touch on, there were farmers, Farm Bureau representatives, CEOs of businesses across the food supply chain. So that would include food processors, distributors, purchasers, vendors. We had the head of food services at LA Unified School District. We had the CEO of the food bank. We had the head of the county of the LA County Department of Public Health, the head of the Division of Chronic Disease and Injury Prevention. That was a really big part of that board. And we had a lot of attendees when we held our meetings. So when we had our first meeting, we had near 100 people. And then every time we had a meeting, we'd get around 200. So we organized it so that we'd get folks into working groups and focused on the working groups that were derived from that report that I showed you already. That had these buckets of action areas. And one of them, again, was a good food economy, which morphed into another working group. But we ultimately had, as I showed you in the other slide, about 1,000 stakeholders. The way we worked, just quickly, was what's called a collective impact initiative. So it's a very collaborative approach. And the idea is that we would serve as a backbone organization. So we weren't intending to push any other organization out of the way and take over the space. We were intending to make everybody else's work more possible by providing whatever background or support, particularly that I could do from the mayor's office standpoint, to help everyone achieve their goals, but in particular that we could get coordinated around a common vision and goal. And one of them became the Good Food Purchasing Program. Our mantra, what we spoke repeatedly about when we had our meetings of 100 and then 120 and then 200 people, were, what are we here to do? We are here to catalyze, coordinate, and connect. So everybody had their own work they were already working on, but where are those places where we know that by our coordination connection, we could catalyze more action, because we felt like we didn't have a lot of time to waste, right? Lots of work needed to be done. At the end, by the time I left, so we, the task force was in 2009. The first meeting of the Food Policy Council itself was 2011. And by the time I left in 2013, we had developed the Good Food Purchasing Program. We'd also worked on food access and food security issues, and worked on helping neighborhood markets convert to being able to sell healthy food, and did some fairly elaborate work along those lines, did a lot of policy work, did an awful lot of work to build public awareness and to engage the public as well as the politicians. So we spread this through to the city council as well, and had everyone involved in participating in having action items that would support these ideas. So we're really happy with how that all went. So one of our programs, as you know, because we're going to talk about it, is the Good Food Purchasing Program. This is what the logo was, and the cover on our standards document when we left, and created the Center for Good Food Purchasing. I'm going to tell you some detail about the Good Food Purchasing program in a second, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about where we are, what we've accomplished, and then I'll work in how the detail of the program, how it operates, and how that might be relevant for Hawaii. So we're now the Center for Good Food Purchasing. We became the Center for Good Food Purchasing in 2015. The program, and I'm going to tell you about the impact we had, but it had impact right away. So it got national attention, and there was demand for their program, and we're now in 20 cities around the country, and this is our logo. I want to go back now. Now that we're in the new slide land of, of the design for the Center for Good Food Purchasing, and go back to this slide that you're already familiar with, which was our Food Policy Council structure. So where did we come from? We came from one of these working groups. So we came from the working group that was a stakeholder working group. We were developing this program to be adopted by LA Unified School District, and LA Unified School District was at the table when we were putting the program together. It was a 2-year process. We went through a lot of research, a lot of stakeholder discussions, a lot of design iterations, a lot of peer review. My intention was that I would recommend this to the mayor to adopt as an executive order for the city of Los Angeles. As a city of 4 million people with a huge, a lot of operating departments. So I was absolutely going to make sure that this was feasible, it was implementable, that any potential stumbling blocks would be anticipated. We weren't going to move forward unless this was something not only that every agency could do, that we were going to ask to adopt it, but that it would make the change, that it would, make the change that we were intending to make. So we went through this long process of stakeholder involvement and iteration. And once we had a final product, we did a lot of peer review, a lot of focus group testing, a lot of vetting. So it was finally adopted. And as you can see, we had well over 100 experts after we did our stakeholder process review this and comment. So I felt comfortable recommending it to the mayor, and he felt comfortable adopting it. So it was adopted by the city of Los Angeles in October of 2012. And then a month later, it was adopted by LA Unified School District. So I'll tell you about the impact in a second, but I want you to see some of the key development partners that we had, and you'll see the County Department of Public Health was there. They helped write the nutrition section, which I'll tell you about in a second. And we had a number of other groups. Some of these are businesses, food businesses, Kuzman's Shipping and Field Fresh Food were food supply chain businesses. They were distributors and processors, and a number of others. There were more people than this, but these were some of the folks who were very key in that process too. So what is at the core of this program? It's grounded on 5 key values. It's grounded on a dedication, and a measuring of how an institution does in these 5 categories: nutrition, environmental sustainability, the valued workforce, that's the FAIR that I mentioned before, local economies, and animal welfare. So once we had it adopted by LA Unified School District, we saw immediate impacts, as I already mentioned. So it was adopted in November of 2012, and in one year at LA Unified School District, we saw immediately this impact. They redirected $12 million into the local food economy. So they have a $150 million a year food service budget, about 120 million of that's in food. They went from less than 10% local sourcing of food to an average of 60% local sourcing of produce is the category that we were measuring for them in 1 year. And the point of it was that they hadn't really thought about local before they got involved in the Food Policy Council. They thought a lot about healthy, but they hadn't thought a lot about local and what that meant to the local food economy. So they were willing, once they understood that and understood why that was valuable, to start making that change, and it sure did. It made a big difference. And it also created 150 new jobs, if you look at this FAIR category, because the $12 million that was redirected toward produce in deliberately sourced from smaller farmers. Again, I'll explain that in a little bit. And then over time, so that was the change we saw in 1 year, but over time we saw even more change because they were looking at our standards and using this tool to assess and rate how they were doing, and they were given opportunities to improve along the way. They did. They started adopting meatless Mondays, which saved a lot of water, which is really important in a lot of places, especially in California. Their vendors started knowing how to comply with our program because it was built into the request for proposals that the school district sent out for bids on the food service contracts. So they started becoming familiar with the program, and they started sourcing more locally and sustainably produced grain for the bread products. And then they also committed to sourcing the chicken without the routine use of antibiotics. And Tyson's has since reformulated a lot of their poultry as a result of LAUSD making that commitment. So we, I mentioned before, sorry, just want to explain again to you where we are with this program because of LAUSD's success and the attention it got. We're now in these 20 cities. You can see the map. We're in all the big cities. We're in New York, Chicago, of course in LA, San Francisco, Oakland. We're in Fresno now, and some of the smaller cities in California like Escondido. We're definitely in Austin, Texas, and a number of other places. I'll show you a slide in a second. But it's 53 institutions, so it's mostly school districts, but it's also municipal institutions such as jails and hospitals and entertainment venues and so forth. And we have, now what does this mean? We have $1 billion in food spend that we're analyzing. Well, let me stop here to explain for just a second that the program works a lot like LEED certification works, if you're familiar with how that works with buildings. Where a building is LEED certified, LEED, which is Leadership in Energy Environmental Design, either silver, gold, or platinum. So we have a rating system like that. I'm going to give you the details in a second. We have a rating system like that, and we audit, so we will get the purchasing information from the institutions that are enrolled, and we will tell them how they're doing and reflect back in the way that LEED, gives their rating. We do that same thing. And LEED also is performance-based versus prescriptive. I'm going to explain that in a second. But based on all that gathering of information that we have from all the school districts, we have a total of $1 billion that we're analyzing right now and reporting back on. Here's just a quick list, not going to spend time on this, but a quick list of some of the institutions that are enrolled in our program around the country. Now, what's our theory of change, right? I've told you about the success, and I've told you about a little bit about what the program is. I'm going to share more about that. But our theory of change here is that if we start with this idea of market demand, if you see that on the top of the slide, if you start with this idea of market demand, we want to enroll public institutions who are using public dollars and who are committed to doing the public good and want to commit, and want to serve the public, toward helping them understand, giving them a tool that helps them create that market demand. And that's mostly how we've seen it. When I remember having somebody who was a chef at a hospital, the UC Davis hospital system, asked me if he could be rated by us, because he said, I know I'm doing good work, I just need help telling this story. And that's part of what we can do. We can help tell the story. But if an institution hasn't already started down that path, we can help shift things in that direction so they can see how it's done. So creating that market demand stimulates the supply chain for these smaller to mid-sized farms. And you can potentially use the high volume, long-term commitment contracts of large institutions to help create financial certainty for those smaller to mid-sized farms, which will help build up that part of the economy and then maintain long-term economic viability for this food that we want to be produced more regeneratively. In other words, I think you all know what that means, but environmentally sustainability at heart, and with their regard for workers across the food chain while supporting the local economies. And of course, this is food that is intended to be the healthier food for our economy. And a lot of, for our people. So I just wanted to point out here that this idea of using purchasing power of institutions to make shifts toward climate-friendly diets, but also to use purchasing power, is reflected on a number of international vehicles, including C40 cities, which I'm pretty sure Honolulu is part of. These are the cities fighting climate change. There's the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. I won't spend a lot of time on all of these, just letting you know that there's all these international vehicles that are looking at, or international organizations that are looking at this same idea and are advocating that, that public procurement be used the same way. We also know that this work that we've done lines up with this United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So this is how our work lines up. We're the Good Food Purchasing Program on the top. All of these goals we analyzed as within the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and this is where ours lines up. The pledges that are in C40 cities and in these other places also line up quite well with the Sustainable Development Goals. So when we all start working in concert with that, it'll start making a lot of difference. And we're working with a number of these organizations, particularly the Cool Food Pledge. We, just to let you know about our program and its recognition internationally, we did get an award in 2018. That's me, you can see right there next to my co-founder, Alexa Delwich. We got an award from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. So this is us in Rome receiving our award, and the World Future Council and IFOAM Organics International as one of the top 8 food policies in the world that they researched that would support agroecology, which is, I'm feeling a little teared up. I feel very humbled by that, but I'm glad to know that it happened and that they saw that this idea that came from this, community-driven, government-driven, completely full blade of grass, not just the grassroots, not just the grass tops, but the full blade of grass process that we went through several years ago, got that recognition. But it shows you the value of that process too, I think. All right, so what do? Once an institution is enrolled in our program, we provide the assessment that I mentioned and analytics. So we look at the data, we help with supply chain research, we tell them how they're doing and provide them reports, and we provide information on the trends that we're seeing. We also can provide training and technical assistance for the institutions. We have a director of institutional impact who ran a food hub in the New England area and used to work with Farm Aid and has a lot of knowledge about supply chain work, who helps with all that. We're working on solicitation and procurement process improvements. Stephanie mentioned that I'm an attorney, so it's kind of the kind of stuff I just get itchy to kind of dig into and find fascinating. May not be for a lot of people, but it definitely is for me, and it's definitely important because it makes a difference. It's how organizations can get things done, actually. And we have a lot of online tools and resources, and we also have peer-to-peer learning and strategy networks. So now we're going to start getting into the heart of like, what are the nuts and bolts of this thing I've been telling you about, this program I've been telling you about, including what is our community around it, because it continues to be community-based. So this is, in the middle is what an institution would get when they're enrolled in our program. So they'll get, this is just one of the pages of a baseline assessment. So this is somewhat hypothetical here. It's just showing you what this organization did in terms of the rating system, and I'll explain the details of how that is assessed in a few slides. But in this particular organization, they did really well on local food economies, and they hit the baseline goal. I'm going to talk about that again in a minute, but the baseline goal of 15%. They were trying to do environmental sustainability, may not have been easy to do where they were, but now they know where they are. They did well in valued workforce and super well in nutrition. So again, what this is, it's a feedback tool. So it's not a requirement that they do anything. It's a feedback tool. And it doesn't, there's no penalty if they can't do anything. It just lets you know where you are and where you might need to focus, and where we might need to be able to get more help from the community groups involved or anyone else. On the right, you'll see how Oakland Unified School District got for a 4-star rating. So basically we have the point system that accumulates into star ratings, and Oakland was able to get a star rating. And this is how they did it. I won't go into detail here on that, but you'll see the main point here is you can see how they did in certain categories adds up to points. So how they get there is they give us, we have these different inputs, for us to get this information together, which include purchasing records with this type of information, as you can see on the left. So our expansion that I've talked to you about is with partners. I want to touch on this before I go into the super specific details on how the program works. So these are the national partners that have participated with us in expanding the program around the country in the way that you saw on the map that I showed earlier. So it includes the Berkeley Food Institute, it includes the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, the Urban School Food Alliance, which is an alliance of the top 13 school districts in the country, and others. And our local partners, just a quick like Logoland look at our local partners, because what I want to mention to you is how have we expanded? We've expanded through working with communities. So we've gone into places where a community-based organization or a food service director or an executive or somebody in the executive branch, like a mayor's office or city council of government, was interested in our program, or sometimes more than one of those three. But there's, in everywhere we've gone, 3 of those have generally been supportive, meaning an anchor institution is going to adopt it, a representative of an elected official's office, and the community-based organization. And where we've found the most success is when that happens, where everyone is working all together toward the same goal, which I know you have in Hawaii from everything I've seen. But this is our partners on the ground who have advocated for the adoption of the Good Food Purchasing Program in their cities. So in Chicago, for example, it was the Food Chain Workers Alliance, which is our national partner I mentioned here, Food Chain Workers Alliance. But then there was also the Chicago Food Policy Action Council. So they combined with others, worked with the mayor's office, had it adopted in Chicago. And we've got, you know, it's where the way it's worked everywhere around the country. Okay, you ready? I'm now going to give you the nuts and bolts part of the standards in 5 minutes, and we'll be pow. So here's the cover of, so when an institution enrolls in our program, they get a manual that we have printed out, but we also have many online versions and other online tools. But they will get this manual that has our purchasing standards, and there's a lot of detail in it. It's easy to read. I'm proud of my team who put it together. I believe it's well designed and easy to read, but there's a lot of information in it. And in it, it shows the baseline standards. It also shows how it all works, which I'm not going to read this because I'm going to talk you through it. But I also want you to know more Logoland here. These standards are updated every 5 years. So our first development of the standards was when it was adopted in 2012, after that long stakeholder process I mentioned to you. And then we update it every 5 years. So it's not a moving target, you know, it's the standards are the standards, but everybody knows every 5 years is an update. We did an update in 2017, that's our version 2. And then that's the cover that you're seeing here. And we're in the process of starting an update for 2022. And we'll, it's very stakeholder driven, as you can see from who our standards committee is. But we also iterate with the enrolled institutions as end users to see how they, you know, to get their feedback as well. So very, you know, informed, stakeholder informed processes all along the way. So this is our standards committee. I'm not going to read it, but you can get an idea from looking at it. It's in alphabetical order, so it's not any particular order of importance, nor is it organized in value category, but it's in alphabetical order. So you can see we have a lot of institutions whose names you're probably familiar with who are participating with us in looking at the standards. And the standards are basically, drum roll, certification based. All right, sorry, why is that? Yeah. I'm sorry, we already saw this. So I'm going to move to the standards. So they're basically, except for local economies and nutrition, certification based. So I'll explain that in a second. But this is just an example of how the local economy standards works. This is a distillation of the detail in our standards document, but it's a baseline requirement that to get to baseline, that 15% of products meet a local economy standard. So this is how we define it based on our work in Los Angeles. So 250 miles made a difference in Los Angeles. As you know, and as we know, local is going to be very different for every region. And we will work with every region we're in to define local differently. So we've had lots of conversations about that. The default is 250 miles, but we will work with a new region to say what makes more sense for them. So far, most regions have looked at another way to define it and are still using 250 miles. It seems to make sense. I mean, you might have like in the New England area, they have a multi-state region, but 250 miles covers it for them. So anyway, that can be discussed. It's not fixed and concrete at all, but it can be discussed. In Hawaii, I would imagine it just could be within state and would make a lot of sense. But what we also try to gear the standards toward is supporting smaller businesses. So the more you get more points when you go up to level 3. So it's basically that you get more points if you source from a smaller farm or cooperative. So like in Hawaii, you have the Ulu Cooperative. Sourcing from them would give an institution in Hawaii tons of points. So that's just one example. But again, this is a 15% or 5% at level 3. I think it's achievable in Hawaii. But the point of this is to get an institution understanding where it is already in this and how it could do even better, get more points, and move up to even a greater percentage. So for environmental sustainability, we basically have it's certification driven. So that's why our standards committee is so important in helping us figure out what's going on with the existing certifications out there. We didn't want to create something that would have the farmers have to reinvent the wheel. There's lots of things farmers have to go through already. It's hard enough to be a farmer, and they're already trying to meet, like Ma Organic Farms knows what it's like to have to be organic certified, right? So there's already a lot of hoops you got to jump through to be organic. So why reinvent the wheel? We got a lot of good certifications out there, so we used them. What we did is, and what our standards committee looks at is, how do we rank them? So what's the way to, what's the hardest ones? What should an organization get more points for buying in? But also, like, what's really okay? It's like, if you're buying certified humane or sustainably grown certified, it's a start. You're going to start somewhere. So it's better than not doing that at all, right? So, and it's 15% of your food spend, so it doesn't have to be the entire budget of these districts. So you get a rough idea here about how that works, and we also bring in the Monterey Bay for seafood, the Seafood Watch Guide. For a valued workforce, very similar, certification-based. I can go into more detail on this if there's questions. I won't spend more time now, but I'm happy to answer any questions on this. Just to give you an idea, though, of how the structure of the program is. Animal welfare, same thing, certification-based. You see that, you get more points when you go to level 3. And then for nutrition, this is a headline version of nutrition, but there's a checklist. It's about 29 items on the checklist. I mentioned to you that the LA County Department of Public Health helped us write it. It was very detailed. We had a lot of discussions around that, and we have a lot of public health schools working with us still on that and refining it over time. So that's what that is. Okay, I'm almost done. I want to just let you know what else we're able to provide that makes changes, which are reports. So I already showed you this report, which is one example. And I already showed you, and this is like one of the details, level details of the data summary in the report. So you can see in this example how this particular institution did with fair food and what we analyzed in terms of where they got their food from. We also have a purchase browser that basically it's like it's a searchable database. So an institution can go in and find out what producers provide. Let's say they wanted to do more, they knew they were doing well on local economies. They wanted to do better on environmental sustainability. So they would enter in, like, we want to hit the level 3. You see where my cursor is on local economies? Who can help us with that? So the database will provide that information, and you can see where it's filled in all the way up to 3, that these places will help them meet those goals if they wanted to do that as they were doing their purchasing. So that's my overview. And what I want to let you know is that in the aggregate, we're already seeing a lot of changes. So LA Unified School District never got past baseline, but I already told you about the difference they made. So even at baseline, even if they don't have a star rating, they're making a huge difference in the local economy. So it's more than $12 million now. It's at 13 million. It's more than 150 jobs. It's at 220. So just imagine, if more institutions were able to really start thinking about how they're doing things, if we're able to be helpful in providing this tool so that they can understand where their purchases are going and making a difference, it can certainly collect up to make a big difference in the long term. Mahalo. I'm Pao now.
Thank you very much, Paula. That was a very inspiring presentation. I'm sure the audience has a lot of questions, but what we're going to do right now is we're going to ask our panel to come back on board to open their videos and their mics, and we would like Sarah and Dexter and Randy to be with us on the screen to just give us some quick feedback, thoughts, reactions, takeaways from Paula's presentation. Okay, I think we will need to stop the screen share.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do I need to do that? I'm not sure. I'm gonna get back into Zoom.
Okay, so there is a button there that says stop share.
It's not showing up. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Okay, yay.
There we go. No, you're good. You're good, Paula. You're good. Okay, so let's have our panelists. Open up their videos, and we've got Dexter there. I can see. Okay, and Paula, please stay with us. How about Sarah and Randy?
Thank you, Susan. Can you hear me?
Yes, Sarah, go ahead.
I have some questions, if I may.
Sure.
Thank you. Paula, it's just lovely to hear what you've been doing. It's just so exciting to even hear that there is some leadership and facilitation going on out there who can kind of help us, guide us. I do feel like a guide is probably a good idea. I do have two questions. The one is, firstly, you said we get points for the smaller farms. My concern is that I feel like we don't want to put all the pressure on a small farm to deliver. So maybe like a farm hub is better, so that if one farm can't deliver, another one can, to kind of just make sure that the supply kind of remains consistent. Would that still give us the points?
Yeah, so what we evaluate is where the food is purchased from. So we work with, there's actually a food hub called the Common Market that started in Philadelphia and now has operations and it was very social justice driven. They meant to serve smaller farmers and serve and address food security in the Philadelphia region. So they're serving Philadelphia, New York, and they now have operations in Georgia and Texas, and they're going to open one in Chicago. But they're a food hub. So the food comes through them, but what we rate is what we let an institution know is who they're purchasing from. So to have the intermediary, definitely helpful. Our role is we're not dictating how an institution buys its food. It's just that if they do buy from a place, we'll tell them how that stacks up in terms of supporting local economies and environmental sustainability and so forth. So let's say it's, they're going to buy from organic farms, but it comes through a food hub or some intermediary. It doesn't change that they will get points for buying from organic farms, as an example.
And one last question, Paula, thank you. How do you get everyone to work together? I see there's you've got a whole bunch of different folks and different departments and agencies, and you've done it only for cities, and we're looking at kind of statewide. What is your secret to getting everyone to work together?
Well, I know it's cities, but let me, LA is kind of like a state. I've worked in LA and was a senior official in the mayor's office. LA was a city of 465 square miles and 4 million people. And working with the LA County is 12 million people, and I don't even know how many. So it's big. It's bigger than many states. We could fit a lot of states into our county. So, really it's just a question of relationships and respecting all the parties and staying in touch and communicating. And I believe this: progress moves at the speed of trust. And so there's a lot of trust building that happens in these conversations, and basically everyone wants to do this. So we have a team of folks that helps helps bring the conversations together, but we move with everybody together.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Okay, Dexter, would you like to take the next stab at this? Any takeaway, any question?
Sure. Absolutely amazed at the program and the metrics. One thing that Oahu is looking at is supporting food hubs and really encouraging kind of this, for us, very innovative model of aggregation. So would that fit similar to a co-op in a level 3, or is that something encouraged that you're seeing across the nation, or are food hubs almost passé?
No, it's such a good question, Dex. And by the way, good to see you again, and congratulations on this position. I'm so excited that you're there. It's really great. They couldn't have picked a better person. I think food hubs are not passé. I think they're finding their moment. And there were a number of reports, actually, that if you want, I can drop one into the chat box for the audience, that support food hubs. So the Rockefeller Foundation, which many of you may know, I think they fund something in Hawaii, a lot of things in Hawaii, but they are really supporting the idea of food hubs as well. This came out of COVID, when they saw that the supply chains were disrupted and that food hubs were better able to be nimble and responsive and to serve community.
Exactly what we're seeing as well.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely it's the opposite of passé. I think the time has come for food hubs, and there definitely would be supported.
Awesome, thank you.
Great, so let's get the reaction from Randy.
Aloha, Randy.
Aloha, how are you?
Good.
I think what you've done is extraordinary. And so I lived in LA for a little while, and the magnitude of what you have to deal with or try to coordinate. I think Sarah's question was absolutely perfect. How do you get everybody to work together? Right? And you're from Hawaii. There's a lot of emotion attached to everything we do. And so it's hard, right? But I think what you've done is phenomenal. Part of the challenge and the Department of Education is evolving its role in the community in a much broader sense. The facilities are facilities, but will begin to play different roles with our communities. We're distribution points for food, we're distribution points for testing, and someday when we get the vaccine, will be places where people will come to get their vaccine, just to get that distribution quickly. So, we've got 290 something facilities. We're a huge franchise of schools all over the place and in key communities. Getting people to work together is a tough one, right? So what you've done is extraordinary with the multitude of different cultures. So I guess I'm just amazed. I mean, so I'm trying to kind of figure out and got to go back and say, okay, so how did you do this here? And your counties and different ethnicities, and how we're going to pull this together. I think COVID has been a galvanizing moment for our communities. Right now, the realization that we are truly interdependent. Right, we got a lot of kids, that need food.
Yeah.
We've got great distribution. We got a whole lot of network of small farmers. And, it's not like I can go to one big producer and say, this is what I need. Can you crank it up? But I got a whole bunch of different farms that and you gotta appreciate the farmer, right? I mean, it is tough work.
For sure.
Our problem is our margins and our costs are so high.
Yeah.
When I add in more distributing partners, my costs go up, and I get extraordinarily more difficulty delivering the product at the price point.
Yeah.
And so at some point I got to cut out a middle person to be effective. So how do you do that?
Well, that last part, in terms of getting folks to work together, we did do a lot of the work in the beginning, and we were very driven by a common goal, which is we wanted to make this change. And we knew we only had a certain amount of time to do it in because the mayor was committed to it. I was committed to it full time. And they knew that was not going to last because we were going to term out. So we wanted to work to get it all done within that period of time. And that really drove people, having that, knowing that there was kind of a time on it and that we had a common goal. And once we had that common goal set up, it started moving okay. So we've kind of done that work of figuring out the program. So now it's a tool. So we found, like in Chicago, for example, so it was in LA, then San Francisco, then Oakland, San Francisco, and then Chicago. So in Chicago, this was used, it's already done. It was used as a tool to bring people together. So the idea of figuring out the what was taken away. Sometimes a lot of conversation can be had with like, well, what is it we're going to do exactly? And how are we going to do it? But we did the what and the how for everybody. So now they just do like, well, how do we do it? How do we do it here? Like, we know the what, we know how it works, we know how it works somewhere else. We can take it because this is plug and play. You can just drop it into another city. How do we do it here? And every city is different. But one of the things that we are looking at too, and I don't, this is about, maybe your question is about cost, yeah? So how do you manage for that? Because you want to make sure that the farmer gets enough. This idea of high volume long-term contracts can be very meaningful to a farmer. So even if the price, like if they're assured that they'll have a contract for 2 years or 3 years with DOE, they may be willing to take a lower price. And I can say, having been in business myself, running a law firm, having a longer term commitment is more stable. You can get financing based on that. You can do a whole lot around that than having a higher price that you're only going to maybe get this month or next month. So sometimes that can help, right? If you structure a contract so that it gives them financial certainty. Another thing that we're looking at, and it's just an idea, so it's not anything that has gone beyond the talk stage yet, but it's creating incentive funds. And there are some states that have incentive funds for school districts to purchase local. Michigan, Oregon, New York, there's a few others, there's like 5. And I just wrote about them and I can't believe I forgot, but it's just showing my age. So, but you know what I mean? But there are, I can get the names of the rest of them, but I know for sure in Michigan, they have a fund that gives 10 cents per meal to the school district to buy local. I know it's a hard thing to ask of governments that are strapped financially, but it's something to think about, for when something comes online and is more possible. But Michigan has that program and they've done really well with the amount that they've been able to direct into local food economy is huge. So that can be another cushion for you, Randy, at DOE, like, having something like that you can use the long-term contracts, but then you can also maybe there could be a working toward a fund to supplement, because I know you don't get much in the school food program. I know it's a small amount.
I'm a free marketeer. I believe the free market forces will make it work. And when we subsidize things, we distort the reality of the free market. At some point when tourism does come back, the farmers are going to go where they can get the best value for their work. And now that there's no tourism, so to speak, the red flag has been raised, and it leans on, the DOE is a large consumer of food product. Unfortunately, it's not local.
Yeah.
Right? So we're working hard to do that. I think it's only like 5% we purchase in state. So we're really trying to make that change.
Can I make one point though? The whole school food system is essentially a subsidy. I mean, it is a federal subsidy program. It's paid for by the federal government. So actually, what we would be doing if an incentive fund was created would be to just doing a supplement to an existing subsidy. But almost everything in the agriculture system is already subsidized. The Farm Bill, it's a huge program that all provides subsidies for how crops are grown. So one way to look at that idea of an incentive program is that it kind of balances the scales a little bit. So just a thought.
Yeah, it's an interesting proposition, right? All the way around.
Yeah, but I can send you information on how it works in Michigan. You can see what you think.
Great, thank you.
Randy,
Paula,
something you said also made me think, Paula, in Hawaii, I think having a cultural metric would also be an important piece to the whole program. Like,
Sorry,
I don't remember seeing any piece that ties in the cultural relevance of foods
yeah.
and purchasing culturally relevant foods, period.
Yeah.
So I think for Hawaii, that'd be kind of a key thing. One of the things
Yeah.
while I was in DOE, we purposed to do was to get things like kalo and breadfruit into the school system where folks just not a usual part of the diet, either
Yeah.
because of cost or availability. So
Yeah.
that would be
Yeah,
kind of
culturally appropriate is very key. I mean, it was a big driver for the Food Policy Council, so it's not lost in here. It's just not, it doesn't have a specific point category, but I think, but what we do have, in terms of points, is we do have like kind of extra credit points, you know, and
I love extra credit points.
Yeah. So that's like, you know, how you manage food waste. Like, so there's all these other types of managements. Equity is actually very centered in this, but in our next round, we're going to put it more so clearly, so it can be more visible. But you're absolutely right. Culturally appropriate makes a big difference. It's a big conversation, and that'll be part of the standards committee conversation going forward.
And it seems almost counter to the whole concept of institutional buying. You know, institutional buying in my mindset was always the brown box of beef or brown box of chicken pieces, right?
Yeah, but that's a culture too, right? So it's just which culture?
True.
But I know what you're talking about, right? I know what you're talking about, and I agree. You know, weaving all those heritage foods into is super important.
Paula, can I quickly ask? You know, because incentive contracts, you know, feds do that all the time. So it's not like an incentive contract is unheard of. And it makes a lot of sense, certainly to raise the standard and to ensure that that's a successful contract. So I'm all about incentives. In fact, couldn't we come up with a way that we could attain savings and then use those savings for incentives? I mean, it seems to me like if we were in some kind of public-private partnership type environment where we could get a kind of push-pull on leveraging those kinds of metrics, perhaps we could eventually find incentives. And this is where my next question comes into hand is, DOE is a huge, our largest, you know, need for food. But my job is to make sure that we consider the other state and even county and other, you know, facilities and organizations that will also need food. And my question to you is, you know, they typically do it inside, it's DOH and it's prisons and it's DOE and everyone's kind of standalone. Have you seen any examples where, say, DOE takes the fresh food and there's black left over and it goes to the prisoners? I mean, is there any kind of crossover where we're leveraging food across departments as well?
I love that idea. I think it's really great. I don't know of an example, but I could check with New York because we're in New York City and we're in a number of institutions in New York. So we're in their school districts and other institutions as well. The Rec and Parks Department. I don't think so. I mean, from what I know LA more intimately and some other places, but from what I know, there isn't any excess. You know, it's all, that's not generally the problem they're faced with. But it's some sort of pooled, pooled resource like that, like you're describing. It's certainly worth exploring.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have talked about the experiences in other states. So let's zero in on Hawaii. And what would be, I think, Paula, you started talking about this a little bit, but I want to ask the panel, what do you think are the opportunities and barriers for institutional purchasing in the state of Hawaii? So we go directly to Hawaii. Anyone can start.
I think the agricultural sector is really ripe maybe pun intended, but they're really ready to start working with state institutions. Maybe not everyone, but enough. And the growth of aggregators like food hubs or even the traditional distributors purchasing from local farms and even ranchers, etc. I think we're at a point that people are willing to work together. The conversations around possible futures contracting, there's farmers now that are saying, hey, that actually sounds like a great plan. 5 years ago, when we first started talking about this, it was like, that sounds a little risky. That's crazy talk, maybe not. But now there's some trust maybe being built between parties, between DOE working with vendors and the hospitals also working with local vendors, that these kinds of conversations are flowing. So I think that's a really strong point to allude to what Sarah was talking about of maybe whether it's like a Hawaii co-op for food purchasing for all the state institutions, or even just being on one solicitation. I think we're at that point in Hawaii that we could pull something like this off.
Great. Sarah, what do you think?
Well, I have some barriers, but I also have some opportunities.
Go ahead.
So don't get too depressed when I list you all the barriers, because the opportunities are on their way, okay? So here are the barriers. There is a large amount, from my perspective. I know Dexter is half glass full, and I love that, and I want to get there. But I've had legislators tell me to my face that they don't believe that Hawaii will ever be food sustainable. And I want to figure out how to make these people believe, because if we don't have our leaders believing this, that's a problem to me, I think, because the next problem is we have no money. Like, we know the Department of Agriculture has like the lowest budget in the whole place. So, we need to understand that our leaders are making this a priority. And so, and that'll lead me to one of my opportunity recommendations. But the next thing is, because we have to give a clear signal that food sustainability is a high priority. How do we do that if we don't have the money? We've got to put our money where the mouth is, money where our, you know what I mean. But so the next problem is that we have no imagination. Up till now, we've really been just trying to do everything inside a lowest bid type of environment or an exemption. But there are so many better ways that we can create procurement contracts and flexibility and use our imagination with the art of the possible. There's a lot of different things where we can put in these contracts to consider the flexibility. But I always say you can put anything in a contract, but you've got to consider, if you're changing policy and you're incorporating new policy, you need infrastructure for it to be successful. So when we talk about the infrastructure, let's, Paula, I think, had one of the videos on her main page about infrastructure. That's so important to get it, to have the base, otherwise nothing is going to happen. So for example, like, who are our hubs? Our farmers are the hubs, the supply, the demand, the research. We need all that infrastructure policy. And there hasn't been a baseline. So although we've said, oh, we're going to increase local food by 20%, we weren't sure where the beginning was. So I think also, that having like a counting way to get points and so on, at least that will give us a baseline to start off with, so we know where we're going. So those are all the kind of barriers, but there's some opportunities. So for example, there's a huge power and authority in environmental sustainability right now for energy. I hear all the time about cars, vehicles. There's a large committee that's the climate change. Why isn't food connected to these committees somehow? Because those are the ones with the power and the access, and they always bringing in, talking about this kind of stuff. We have to do it. Wouldn't it be great if food was incorporated in that? Another opportunity is procurement flexibility, like I've told you. And what about leveraging the new city positions and creating a steering committee or food policy and an action group with milestones and deliverables. I think that would be fantastic. I mean, I think that's what's been missing, is the city having folks, looking at this seriously. And so now that, these positions exist, I think that's a fantastic opportunity to leverage. And then, let's leverage state and county needs together, because I think that, again, we could probably be smart and help each other out depending on, and make that procurement even more flexible. So those are mine.
Great. Let's go to Randy. What do you think, Randy, in terms of opportunities and
Absolutely. I think there's always opportunities, and the conditions change on a regular basis. So it's our ability to adjust to those changes in the environment. And I worked with Sarah a little bit when I was at DBED. She's absolutely right. There are those that walk the talk and those that are just talking it. And it takes extraordinary energy to go and listen, this is where we need your help. And unfortunately, politics is just part of our life here in Hawaii, right? We may not like how it's shuffled all around, but we're not that unique. What makes us unique is we're an island and a very small community. Some believe that one point, we talk about sustainability, I've heard different views of the world about how many Hawaiians were here before, and they were self-sustainable. Nothing was coming in, right? And there could have been about 1 million Hawaiians here. So it's not an impossibility. It's the willingness to get it done together. And sometimes in a world of social media, and everybody's got an opinion on how we should be doing things, and sometimes you just got to go out and do it, right? And just keep on grinding at it. And that's going to take the kinds of quality people to work together to get it done. Sarah just helped me out on our last conversation. We were looking for some space, and she chipped in and said, "Hey, Randy, we got some space that we can help you with." Great. That's the kind of small cooperation that we have to have on a daily basis. And I think Paula, you achieved that. It's just commitment and takes time and energy, right? This is what we want to achieve as a community. So we'll just go forward. It's one step at a time.
Okay, great. I think that brings us to another question for our panel, which is, given the COVID impacts, what is the desire and readiness level of the different agencies, education, agriculture, health services, and the counties to venture into this space? I think there's a lot of optimism from what our panel is saying, but how ready are the different players to get involved? Anyone?
I think, I go back to, I think with all the misery that COVID has caused, I think it's also caused us to reassess where we are and what we need to do. It's not all bad. I think it's, once again, a galvanizing moment to try to see what we can do as a community. And let's just go. I mean, this is not the first one. It ain't gonna be the last one. It's what we do in between.
Yeah. Dexter, what do you think? How ready are the different agencies?
I'll speak for the counties, where each county now has the food access coordinator, somewhere either embedded in the county itself or in a partner organization. So I think the counties have really ramped up as well in looking at, especially during COVID, looking at both food access, so getting and ensuring our most vulnerable community members have access to food, but also organizing around local agriculture to ensure we can feed them. And so things are definitely looking up. City and County of Honolulu just had this position, or started this position 4 weeks ago. So it's a little new, but better late than never, right?
Great. Sarah, what are your thoughts on readiness?
Well, I'm not as positive of you as you guys, because they keep telling us, that our economy is down the toilet, and you know, they're telling us we're going to get furloughed from the 1st of December. So to me, I would think that the departments, and I don't know, I'm not part of any of those departments. I can't speak on those departments, but I would say from an economic perspective, the departments are being really pressured right now to make it as lean, their budgets as lean as possible. So somehow we've got to figure out how to get local food without raising the price, because as soon as the price is raised, departments are going to say, oh, no, that's my budget. I had it for something else and we don't want to go there. And so we have to be very careful about finding the fine line so that we can still, support local, but not kill everybody's budgets while doing it.
I hear that, Sarah, but I feel like it's almost, it almost accentuates the fact that government should be doubling down actually during this time to focus on buying local, to keep the money in our local economy. And I get it. It's being in the DOE, it is a hard balance because you've got 3 million to feed the kids all year long. What do you do if I'm going to pay $7 for breadfruit or $3 for local non-local item, right? So I get there is that, but I almost feel like it's a government responsibility to figure this out, how we can double down on supporting our neighbors.
Okay, great. I think, well, we've got a number of questions from the audience, but I just want to throw one more question to the panel. And that would be for you to give a very short, insight or reflection on what are the bright spots across Hawaii. Dexter, the spotlight's on you, so go ahead with that.
Okay. The institutions in the last few years have really, I feel, have really stepped up to the plate. The state hospitals, Hawaii Healthcare Systems Corp, have done absolutely amazing projects and amazing changes to their operation to both streamline, as Sarah was saying, to find some cost savings in their operation. But instead of just wiping it out of their budget, HHSC is now investing it in their food so they can buy that carrot that is grown locally, that is a lot more expensive than the mainland version. On one hand, they're a lot smaller, so DOE may not have had a full metamorphosis yet, but the steps that the DOE has taken in both being a little more creative and not just doing a cost-based solicitation, but doing requests for proposals for food and looking for further value, I think were really good steps that the DOE, one of the largest, if not the largest food purchaser, at least purchasing government institution in the state, has been doing, and trying to be really innovative in not only purchasing, but also working on the customer satisfaction side, because if the kids aren't going to eat it, then kind of what's the point, right?
Great. Randy, what are your thoughts on that? What are the bright spots?
I think, the realization that we have to do something different, right? We feed, in our heyday, about 90,000 kids a day. We're one big restaurant on all islands, right? But now we've fallen down to 3,000 a day. So the question is, where are these kids eating, right? So when Dexter talks about the demand side against our supply side, we've got to figure that out, and we've got to get better at, our product, so to speak. Part of that is inefficiencies. Part of it is modernization of our kitchens and how we distribute, and helping and creating that relationship with the farmers to say, if you grow this, we will purchase it from you, right? Dexter and I joke about tilapia, right? Tilapia is not, high on the list, whether you bread it, fry it, whatever. But, there's other options that we have to explore. So we're working at that. A big initiative we had is a centralized kitchen, and we're looking out on the west side, places adjacent to the farming community. So the farmers can bring the food to our large centralized kitchen that will service 9 schools and 2 charters on the west side. So we create these efficiencies in the kitchen. We create better purchasing and distribution and quality of product. So that's a huge initiative for us, because we can lift that model and put it in Kapolei. We can lift that model and put it in Wahiawa, on the Big Island, wherever we need to. So this is a pretty big effort for us, and there's great efficiencies to it. So we go from there. So I'm optimistic. We'll get there.
Wonderful. Sarah, what are your thoughts on that? Highlights. What are the
As long as we get there before 2050, because I believe that's when the global food shortage is going to happen. Look, from my perspective, I don't know anything. I'm not a subject matter expert on farming. I do know that I like my food, and I don't like the fact that I have to pay, double for the food here, but it's worth it because it's Hawaii. And so I feel like, from my perspective, I'm concerned about long-term viability for Hawaii in general. I'm considering, from a disaster perspective, how do we manage our food? From a disaster perspective, if we were stuck now for 2 weeks, we would have to have all that food flown in, billions of dollars. So, from my perspective, I'm thinking about long-term, where's Hawaii? What's Hawaii's vision? What are we doing to kind of protect ourselves against disasters in general? And then, things like pandemics, those kinds of things. So my bright spot is the fact that people have come back. People like yourselves are here because you believe in this and you believe that it can be done. And that's what I think I need to hear right now is the community, anyone, just bang on our doors and tell us you're ready and that you want it, because that's the kind of thing that will fuel our energy and keep us moving in the right direction, which I think is awesome. And we're definitely on board, and we got to do it.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay, we're going to go quickly into the questions from the audience.
Can I just make one comment though too?
Go ahead, Paula. Go ahead, sorry, Paula. Go ahead.
When my mother was in office, she was in office from 1990 to 1994. And they were having conversations back then about diversifying Hawaii's economy because they were so concerned about it being so dependent on tourism. That was a long time ago. And I feel like what we've been given is an opportunity because everything has been laid bare. We've had a chance to really rethink this challenge that we've faced here in Hawaii with you all are there. I feel like I'm there with COVID and then with hurricanes. We'll leave Hawaii with the need to be, everybody knows this, but with the need to be economically more self-sufficient. So I've seen this comment in the chat box, but I believe it. It's not, when you spend more on local food, really the way you should think about it is that it's an investment, because it does rebound back to the local economy in ways that are pretty significant. So it's not just about, what percentage of the dollars, you've spent on food, but it's how much are you willing to invest in your own community is what that is. So I think the only thing that's limiting us is our imagination, because all of these problems that we're talking about can be solved. And one of the bright spots I'm seeing is everybody in this room and part of this chat, because everybody's pretty focused on it. And there's a lot of goodwill there to make this possible. Thanks for letting me say that.
Yeah, great, Paula. I mean, that's good. We think about, Dexter talked about institutions stepping up. Randy's talking about how people are starting to do things differently and to think differently. And as you and Sarah have pointed out, people are here, people are engaged, and they want things to change. So we've got a couple of questions for you moving forward regarding readiness and next steps together. Paula, how does the Center for Good Purchasing assess readiness for cities and regions, considering working with?
Mm-hmm.
What's next with your involvement here?
Well, what we've found makes it most successful and where we've gone, and I want to mention that in all the places that we're enrolled, we weren't knocking any doors, they came to us. So somebody was interested in having our program there, and there's more. We have a lot more in the pipeline. So for us, though, it's to have whoever that first inquiry came from, but to have all three legs of that stool, right, to make it a stable stool, which is the community-based organizations that are willing to do the work, that will work with the farmers, that will interface with a number of organizations that will help keep everybody accountable. That's the, that's our responsibility, Kuleana, when we're in positions like this, is we need people to help us, stay on track and keep us accountable, right? So to have the community-based organizations, to have the elected offices, and to have the anchor institutions all ready, that's all the readiness we need, because as everybody's willing and put their heads together and put their will on the table, put their will together, merge their wills together, we can solve whatever the issues are and move it forward.
Great. Paula, the next question is, where do you start? So how about starting with the key private institutions like the Kamehameha schools, Lolani, Punuhu, hotels?
Sure.
You can get your position to start because they have bigger budgets.
Yeah, it really could be anywhere. In North Carolina, we were in a university. So we worked at one of the universities there. It really depends on where the readiness is, but it could certainly start somewhere, someplace that has the willingness and is willing to work with their procurement processes. So it's not just about budget. So our tool rates how you're doing. It doesn't mean you have to spend more. I want to say that change LA Unified made, they didn't change their food budget at all. I started doing this work after the Great Recession. Remember I said it started in 2009? We had a Great Recession then, and nobody had budgets that were meaningful. That we were laying people off. This conversation we're having now about layoffs and furloughs, I went through as a City Hall employee because we were in the middle of it. So we were not going to create something that people had to spend more on. So they worked within their existing budget. So the way LAUSD did it is they said, here's how much we're going to spend, and here's how we want to do it. Like, can you, vendor, tell us how we can get this food supply to us? And those long-term contracts, as I mentioned earlier, made it possible for them to keep it within their existing budget. Now, you want to do more? This is where we talk about incentive funds. So sometimes, that'll help you do even better, but you can still make that. They just shifted a percentage of their purchasing from out of state to local. And it made that much difference. It was just a shift versus an increase. Right. That makes sense?
Not
I know what you're saying, because Hawaii might be more expensive, but I think there could be ways to structure these contracts that have it, kind of work for everybody. They just have to be looked at.
So not necessarily institutions with bigger budgets. It's just really having the commitment to do it.
Having the commitment to do it, and having, the willingness to solve the problems, which I believe is there. They're just stepping stones on a path.
Okay, Paula, Sarah mentioned earlier that there are legislators who will say it can't be done. How do you convince them?
Listen, I mean, if we had a dollar for every it can't be done, we could fund the budget. but every change we see comes from a place where it was one way, it turned to another. And I really appreciated Sarah talking about renewable energy, because I looked at renewable energy and how that came about, because I remember this from, working in environmental issues in the 80s. It didn't seem possible that we would ever be able to reduce our dependence on oil. And Jimmy Carter, some people may think, remember, he tried to get renewable energy going, didn't work out. Other federal administrations came in and didn't like what he was doing. And then it went to the local level, and the local level set targets, right? So in Hawaii, there was a target, very ambitious one. In LA, it was just 20% renewable by 2020. So you start setting those targets, and you start seeing what your mix can be and start working toward it. You start making that change. So I'm bringing up renewable energy as an example of somebody once saying it can't be done, but it was done. And it just took, folks figuring out wait a minute, let's just take these steps that we need to take now to start making this change, and seeing what we can do based on the tools we have now and how we can build on that over time. And you start making a change that will make a worldwide difference.
Well, there's a question here about enabling policy or procurement code. Did Los Angeles or California have to make adjustments to its procurement code to facilitate local food purchase?
Yeah, that's a good question. And no, we didn't. They worked within their bounds. So the one change they did is they built the Good Food Purchasing Program into their RFP. So it's very Sarah's very familiar with this process, but it's a a very structured process for bidding to make sure that it's fair and you get the best price. But in some places you can also add in certain values, like you want to have a sweat-free purchasing ordinance, maybe that's incorporated into that. There's a number of values that can be embedded into procurement policies. So the Good Food Purchasing Program was included in it. So when the bid went out for produce, for a 5-year contract for produce, LA Unified said, and you must show us responsible bidders, how you're going to comply with the Good Food Purchasing Program. And we want to see, how you can comply at a certain star level. So that was what they did, but they didn't have to change their rules in order to do that. There may be some places where the rules are different, so we can look at that issue. We can tackle it place by place.
Yeah, well, related questions for Sarah is, Sarah, do you anticipate stickiness in the state's procurement code associated with meeting the metrics that policy?
There's so much flexibility inside of the procurement code. Where the stickiness comes in is when a certain attorney reads it or a certain specific person reads it and says, oh, it's either not in there, so it says we can't do it, or the way that they read it says they can't do it. So, I like the federal acquisition regulation because there's a ton load of regulations in there, but right at the beginning it says, you know what, if it's not illegal, we encourage innovation, do it. And so what I want to say is we have a ton load of flexibility inside of our procurement vehicles that most people don't utilize the full potential of. And so essentially you can create whatever, like Paula says, whatever you can imagine, you can put essentially in your contracts. And you could ask for, what we would ask for is a quality control plan, but where the rubber meets the road with contracts is post-award. And you've got to have the infrastructure set up in order for the contract to be successful. So whatever you've imagined, the art of apostle, and you throw it in there, make sure the infrastructure is there first. Otherwise, you're just asking the contractor to fail.
Okay, thank you very much. We have some more questions, but we're running out of time. I'd like to thank our panelists, Sarah, Randy, and Dexter. And I'd just like to give Paula a few minutes to, sum up or give us your last thoughts. It has certainly been a very inspiring and empowering discussion, and sounds to me like it's all very positive. So, Paula, what are your last few words for us?
God, it's probably going to start crying if I think about this too much. I'm still thinking about that question of some people thinking it can't be done. And, my answer is where there's a will, there's a way. One of the stories that I always find so inspiring is the hokulea. Because I just remember, I was, when I left Hawaii, the hokulea was just an idea. And while I was away here in college, it started coming together. What that vision, what that voyage did in terms of proving what can be done is a lesson that we all need to just keep in mind. And it has changed so much, and it brought back so much of a understanding and acknowledgement of who we've been as a society in Hawaii and what we're capable of and what we know we're capable of, to be able to move forward and to make this place one that we can all be very proud of and know that it works well for everybody.
Thank you very much, Paula, for your time, for sharing, for your energy and your passion, which we can feel through the webinar, and to all of our panelists who joined us today. So over to you, Steph.
Thank you, Susan. So just wanted to reiterate, we recognize that there were many questions that we weren't able to get to, and we look forward to opportunities to continue these discussions. I do want to give a big mahalo to Susan for being our moderator today. Big mahalo to Sarah, Dexter, Paula, and Randall for being our guest presenters. And thank all of you for joining us on Zoom today. Our next webinar will be on Wednesday, October 14th from 1 to 2 p.m. and we will be announcing the topic and speakers soon. Mahalo again for joining us today. Be safe, be well, and we hope to see you again on our next webinar. Aloha.
Thank you so much for having me as part of this.